Welcome back to State of the Union. Donald Trump swept Republican contests in the Northeast, the West, the Midwest, and now last night the South, where he notched another landslide victory against his remaining rival, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. But Haley says she's not dropping out. Here with me now is a top Trump supporter whose border policies have done a lot to shape this year's political debate. Texas Governor Greg Abbott joins me now. Thank you for joining me, sir. Let's start with last night's results in South Carolina. Nikki Haley said that 40% is not some tiny group. There are huge numbers of voters in our Republican primaries who are saying they want an alternative. That is her quote. Is she right? Is her level of support a warning sign for Donald Trump?
Listen, in politics, a 20-point victory is huge. And it's the type of victory that President Trump has been achieving across the country. But last night was even more meaningful because it was a victory by 20 percentage points in a state where Nikki Haley was the governor. So she is beloved more in South Carolina than perhaps any other state in America. And you can see the trajectory that President Trump is on. And after defeating Nikki Haley so badly in South Carolina, he's on a pathway to win these other states, win Super Tuesday, and be able to have the nomination clinched by the middle part of March. And so I would say the win is strongly at the back of President Trump. And as he pointed out in his remarks last night, not even making reference to Nikki Haley, he said that the party truly is unifying. And you can see it in comparison to, say, his past primaries. Now, listen, the party is far more unified behind President Trump at this particular time than has been in any other race that he's had.
Governor, I want to ask you about what happened in Alabama. The Supreme Court there ruled that frozen embryos should be considered human beings. That, of course, as you know, prompted 3 IVF fertility clinics in the state to abruptly pause care in order to avoid potential liability for wrongful deaths if the embryos were to be destroyed. Do you agree with the Alabama Supreme Court that embryos are human beings?
Well, listen, obviously there's some uncertainty lingering from this, but candidly, let's go back to President Trump, because President Trump put out a statement on this that I think a lot of people agree with, and that is a goal that we all kind of want to achieve, and that is we want to make it easier for people to be able to have babies, not make it harder. And the IVF process is a way of giving life to even more babies. And so what I think the goal is to make sure that we can find a pathway to ensure that parents who otherwise may not have the opportunity to have a child will be able to have access to the IVF process and become parents and give life to babies. And because this is a relatively new issue, we're just going to find ways to navigate laws and fact situations that are very complicated.
Well, let me ask you about your state. Texas has one of the strictest anti-abortion laws in the country. Are you saying that families in Texas who are using IVF have extra embryos that are frozen, do not need to worry?
Well, so you raise fact questions that are complex that I simply don't know the answer to. Let me give you a couple of examples, and that is, I have no idea mathematically the number of frozen embryos. Is it 1, 10, 100, 1,000? Things like that matter. What I don't know is families who may have frozen embryos, what happens if they were done so that a mother could have a pregnancy, but after those embryos were frozen, the mother passes away? What happens then? What happens if after the embryos are frozen, the mother and the husband, they get a divorce? Here's my point in telling you that, Dana, and that is these are very complex issues where I'm not sure everybody has really thought about what all the potential problems are, and as a result, no one really knows what the potential answers are. And I think you're going to see states across the entire country coming together and grappling with these issues and coming up with solutions.
Yeah, it is incredibly complicated. You said states across the country. Your state is a pretty important one. Will you be urging the legislature to come up with laws that deal with this this question and keep IVF legal?
So for one, I have no doubt that Texas will be among the states that will be addressing this issue when we can bring together all the different scenarios about what could happen. But also knowing Texas, listen, as you know, Texas is a pro-life state. And we want to do everything possible that we can to maintain Texas being a pro-life state. But at the very same time, I think Texans agree with what President Trump said, and that is we as a state want to ensure that we promote life, we bring more life into the world, and we empower parents to be able to have more children.
Yeah, it is very, very complicated. I want to turn to the border. Governor, you have successfully made blue states pay attention to the migrant crisis by sending tens of thousands of migrants to cities like New York and Chicago. President Biden is considering an executive action to restrict migrants' ability to seek asylum after they illegally cross the border. Would you support that?
So, no, because what that would, if he were to grant asylum after migrants cross the border illegally, that would be authorizing illegal immigration, and that would cause chaos. But listen, Dana, one thing you mentioned, you said he's considering executive action. Know this, and that is what the president said a couple of weeks ago, that he needed Congress to pass a law for him to be able to take action. That was completely false. The fact of the matter is there are laws on the books passed by Congress of the United States right now that authorize the executive branch to deny illegal entry, if people get here illegally, to detain them, as well as to require the president and the presidential administration to build border barriers. The president is not using his executive authority to do any of those things that Congress has already authorized. The president does not need new laws. The president needs a backbone to make sure that he enforces the immigration laws that are already on the books.
Governor, let me just jump in, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but our understanding of what the president is considering is restricting migrants' ability to seek asylum. Why not support that?
Because, well, let me tell you what I heard you say, and that is I heard you say that people who enter the country illegally would be able to go through an accelerated asylum process. Understand this, in the state of Texas, we have 28 ports of entry, and it is illegal in the United States of America for these illegal immigrants to cross between those ports of entry.
Right.
What the president has to do first is to establish clearly anybody who crosses the border between a port of entry illegally must be treated in the illegal way, subject to arrest. And so the first thing the president of the United States has to do is say no more crossing the border between a port of entry, and saying that if you cross the border between a port of entry, you lose your ability to seek asylum in the United States.
Before I let you go, do you have any interest in being Donald Trump's running mate?
So then, listen, my focus is solely on Texas, and my interest is, first of all, supporting the President Trump, getting elected, and that means helping him find the right vice presidential candidate who will help President Trump get elected, and then help him be successful when he does get elected. And I think there's so many people other than myself who are best situated for that. I can best help President Trump by being the leader of Texas, helping him achieve what he needs to achieve in the great state of Texas.
Governor Greg Abbott, thanks for joining me this morning.
Sure. Thank you, Dana.